Hello everyone, and welcome to my channel, The Glammed Rebel. I hope everyone's having a good day. Please like, comment, and subscribe for daily updates. Taylor reveals Steffy is not Ridge's biological daughter after donating blood to save Steffy. In a shocking turn of events that has left the elite of Los Angeles reeling, the long-standing question of Steffy's parentage blasted into the open with the power of a goods train, forever transforming the lives and allegiance of the Forrester family and their inner circle. Steffy's parentage has been a mystery for a long time. During a tense afternoon at Forrester Creations, Rich Forrester received a life-altering phone call from Finn. At the time, his mind was busy with the delicate topic of Nick's upcoming proposal to Brooke. Meanwhile, Rich Forrester's mind was preoccupied with the details of the situation. Steffy had been a passenger in a vehicle that had been involved in a terrible collision on the Pacific Coast Highway. By the time her stylish convertible crashed into the railing, the airbags had already deployed, and the windscreen had been smashed. Unconscious and bleeding, she lay there, a seat belt across her torso and wounding her. The tone of Finn's voice was tense and urgent as he sought O-positive blood, Steffy's uncommon kind, and cautioned that the hospital's reserves were at an extremely low level. Ridge decided to forego all hopes of meddling in Nick's romantic grand gesture and race back to the family's private airstrip. He boarded the Creations jet with the sole intention of rescuing his daughter. Ridge did this without any hesitation. Ridge's mind raced through images of Steffy's brilliant smile, her defiant spirit, the long evenings spent overseeing her designs and watching her grow not only as a Forrester, but also as a formidable force in fashion. As the engines roared overhead, Ridge's mind was filled with images of Steffy. It had only been a few hours since he had last seen Brooke's optimistic gaze, and he was completely oblivious that the man she cherished was at odds between love and duty. With his hands squeezed tightly on the window frame, Ridge made a solemn commitment to do whatever it needed to achieve his goal. After a few moments, he arrived at the Los Angeles Memorial Hospital. The eyes were icy with concentration as the suit jacket was draped over one shoulder. Cords and monitors beeped at a frenetic pace as the nurses hurriedly brought him to the trauma unit. The tiredness and fear that were carved into Ridge's features led him to a secluded room where blood was drawn, only to show something that made him unable to consider the possibility. The blood type of Ridge was not the same as that of Steffy. In a professional setting, Finn's composure broke down. While his mouth was slack, he dropped his pen. Ridge had a look of amazement on his face as he peered at the blood bag, the crimson contents teasing him. That antiseptic and buzzing room was where hope was converted into ash. Brooke, Taylor, Eric, and the rest of the Forrester Logan clan were sent into a tornado of shock and despair when they learned about the mismatch, which spread like wildfire. While Brooke was rushing to go to the hospital, the confetti of wedding plans that she was holding began to wilt. She was overcome with grief and uncertainty, and she began to question her own comprehension of the family she had married into through her marriage. During the time when the remaining members of the gathering audience were struggling to comprehend the fact that Ridge could not be Steffy's real father, Taylor Hayes entered the room, a tear in her eye, soiled and pallid. Her makeup was stained by tears that she was unable to suppress, and her arms were shaking. She confessed the reality that every fan had been muttering about, but no one had the courage to believe it. Her voice broke beneath the weight of her confession. RIDG did not have a child named Steffy, a connection that was created in a moment of raw passion and betrayal that Taylor had hidden for years. She was the product of Taylor's secret romance with Eric Forrester. She was the product of a secret affair. In response to the reverberation of Taylor's words against the walls, Ridge's knees buckled. As the entire fabric of his existence began to unravel, the complexion of his face became drained of color. He had a daughter named Steffy whom he had cherished, disciplined, watched marry and raise children, but she was not his own daughter. Her own part in this drama was abruptly eclipsed by the seismic familial rupture that was unfolding in front of her, and Brooke, who was ordinarily the pillar of strength, felt the world move under her feet. After entering the corridor at that precise moment, Eric appeared to be a man who had just stepped into a nightmare. The ashen face of Ridge, Taylor's confession, and Finn's disturbed countenance were all things that he took in. His eyes flashed with a mixture of regret, shame, and a flash of panic, which sparked a new surge of tension between the brothers. To make amends for what had been done, would Eric rush to console Taylor as soon as possible? On the other hand, would he confront Ridge's rage and demand explanations of his own? The monitors in the intensive care unit resumed their incessant beeping, registering time that appeared to be irresistibly valuable at this point. The machines were attempting to breathe life into Steffy's shattered body as she lay still. In the midst of the doctor's efforts to find alternate donors who possessed the uncommon blood type, rumors were heard across the crowd that had gathered. What is the remaining number of units? Was it possible to find a suitable match before it was too late? Ridge retreated from the bedside and addressed Taylor with a voice that was hardly audible above a rasp. His face was distorted by the pain of heartbreak. "Are you sure you didn't tell me? You allowed me to adore her as if she were my own after all these years. You have made me believe." "How come, Taylor?" Even as tears continued to fall, they reached out as if to bridge the gap of years of silence that had separated them. She lied and murmured, "I was afraid." Concerned about losing Eric, as well as you and Steffy, among other things. "I was afraid that if I were to tell you the truth, it would bring about the end of all of us." Suddenly, her eyes darted to the closed door behind which Steffy had been fighting for her life, and she instantly collapsed, her shoulders quivering. The question became more and more pressing as the seconds passed. Any chance that Eric's blood could be a match? Another possibility is that Rich Ridge, who had constructed his entire identity on the role of a protective father, would be permanently excluded from the role of biological father. At that tense moment, Eric experienced the full weight of the offenses he had committed. He had allowed himself to enjoy a brief moment of vulnerability with Taylor, and then went back to his marriage with Brooke, under the impression that the affair had been successfully buried. Having now been presented with the discovery that his son by Brooke, Ridge's firstborn, who is now a husband and father himself, had grown up with lies that they had all unintentionally perpetuated, he was now confronted with the news. The weight of his remorse caused Eric to stumble and fall. Following his conversation with Finn, who was in charge of managing the logistics of the urgent transfusion, he discovered that there was one possible match on record. Not only was the race against time shifting gears in order to keep Steffy alive, but it was also shifting gears in order to rescue the shattered trust in the Forrester dynasty with a donor who had not yet been located and who lived out of state. When we returned to Brooke's room, which had been changed from a wedding suite into a crisis command center, Nick was there, his engagement ring weighed down in his pocket, and his heart was torn between love and loyalty. The moment he learned of Steffy's accident, his excitement turned into a mixture of horror and shock. The news that Ridge's blood was useless and that his beloved Steffy might pass away came to him at this moment. But what was much more concerning was the fact that he felt the razor-sharp blades of this revelation sever the links that were holding the family together. Brooke, who was dressed in her white robe, could not help but look at the polished hardwood floors. Images of Nick getting down on one knee were filling her head, but they were now being replaced by images of the lady who had put her life in danger on the very street where Nick had intended to make his declaration of love. As she came to this realization, she realized that Steffy, regardless of whose daughter she was, required every ounce of sacrifice that they could manage at this particular moment. It was in the corridor that she discovered Ridge and Taylor, who were embracing each other in a state of grief. She encircled them with her arms and said, "We'll get her through this. There will be no secrets, and there will be no betrayal. Nothing is more important than Steffy at this moment." While they were clinging to each other in their shared pain, Finn ran out into the hallway on his phone. immediately coordinating with blood banks and Red Cross centers located around the state of California. A young man who had registered at a high school blood drive many years ago was notified by a donor registry that he was a match. This occurred 10 miles to the north in Ventura County. The clock was a factor that dampened Finn's relief, but it was still palpable. There are bottlenecks in traffic, ambulance wait times, and hospital protocols. The sky outside had changed to dusk, and the shadows were becoming longer and longer across the exterior of the hospital like 2 fingers. Steffy's injuries might not outlive the wait, but it could kill her sooner. Ridge let himself a fleeting minute of wrath in the corridor, and then he threw his jacket to the ground out of frustration. He then slumped against the wall. All these years, I believed she was mine. I loved her as my own, he muttered quietly. The words are somewhat incoherent. In an effort to provide him with some measure of solace, Taylor brushed her cheek on his shoulder. The voice of Taylor was shaking as she claimed that she was still our daughter. It is the same girl who required your assistance. On the helipad, a few moments later, an ambulance blasted onto the scene. The paramedics are bringing in chilled coolers of opposite blood that are boiling. At the same time as Finn, dressed in full scrubs, was preparing the first bag for the transfusion, Ridge, Taylor, Brooke, and Eric gathered around Steffy's bed. As soon as the first crimson stream entered the foreline, Ridge grabbed Taylor's hand and held it tightly. The urgency of Steffy's life hanging in the balance caused Liam and Hope to put their own broken past to the side as they stood by outside the corridors crowded with other loved ones. They were notified of the situation and did not move from their position. The administering of the transfusion started, and the monitors became more steady, with the beeping gradually becoming a less frenzied pulse. Doctors nodded to one another. The match was absolutely ideal. The audience that was gathered felt a wave of relief flow over them like a slow tide during that brief break. In contrast, Rich was plagued by the realization that he was no longer Steffy's biological father. This knowledge loomed over him like a heavy cloud. There was a fact that would rewrite every memory, every Christmas morning, and every prayer that they had ever spoken to each other before going to bed altogether. When Steffy finally opened her eyes, she was confronted with the unrelenting glare of the hospital lights and the medicinal odor of disinfection. Even though she appeared to have been reborn inside a cocoon of misery and bewilderment, she lay motionless for a brief period, with every nerve in her body ablaze. There were harrowing times in which the constant beeping of monitors counted down her chances of survival. On the other hand, the reality that suddenly dawned on her was more jarring than any physical discomfort she had ever experienced. Even if she were still alive, however, nothing would ever be the same again. She made an effort to bring her palm up to her face, but her arm felt as if it were made of lead, her body a conduit from another world. After that, Rydage's voice, which was ripped, ragged, and unrelenting in its suffering, suddenly emerged from the haze. An expression of relief flashed across his face as he said, "Steffy, you're awake," and then vanished in the same breath as the words that he was about to say. Her brow wrinkled as she mustered the courage to sit up, her eyes traveling over the faces of those who had come. "There is something you need to know." Although her eyes were puffy and empty, Taylor was cowering against the wall. Brooke tightened her grip on Ridge's coat sleeve as if it were her only means of survival. At the very edge of the room, Eric stood rigidly. His entire face was engraved with the expression of guilt. After that, Ridge continued his speech. As if they were stones falling into a quiet pond, the words fell out. "I do not consider you to be my physical daughter," almost as if the walls were tilting. The beeping became muted. At that very moment, Steffy experienced the sensation of the floor falling out from under her. She was familiar with the world and all of its achievements and joys. During the late-night design sessions, the pride that was there in her father's eyes began to disintegrate. As she struggled to swallow the lie that she had been living for the past 3 decades, her breath became stuck in her throat and tears began to pool. Taylor took a step forward, her voice breaking under the strain of the confession, and painted the truth that was intolerable. She had slept with Eric in a moment of passion many years ago, and the kid that was born as a result of that secret union had been passed off as Ridge's. She had been betrayed by her own heart throughout this lie. Taylor cried out, "I was full of fear. I am terrified that you will despise me, that you will go, and that I will lose all of you." Nevertheless, her worries pale in comparison to the tidal wave of betrayal that slammed through Steffy's awareness. How was it possible for the mother she had admired and the father she had cherished to have woven this falsehood so carefully that it blinded them all? As she struggled to take a breath, she was filled with rage and sadness in her chest. She turned to Ridge with her eyes flaming, searching his face for wrath or solace, anything other than indifference, but all she saw was anguish reflected back at her. Despite the fact that his hands were shaking as he stretched out, Steffy jerked back, and her heart broke open immediately. She was only able to hear the thud of her own pulse in her ears as the realization dawned on her. This was so loud that it drowned out the whispers of the doctor and the frantic shuffling of the nurses as they attempted to stabilize her blood pressure. For a brief instant, she pondered whether or not she would be able to endure this wound any longer than the one that had come so close to taking her life. However, as she leaned back against the pillow, her body and spirit were beaten beyond measure, and she let out a sob through her tears. While Steffy was lying in a cloud of betrayal and uncertainty, the shock waves of Taylor's revelation tore through the Forrester world. These shock waves collided with the frail marriage of Donna and Eric, which caused their relationship to enter uncharted territory. Having arrived at the hospital just a few hours earlier, Donna had the mistaken belief that she was rushing to assist her stepsister, who was experiencing a crisis. On the contrary, she discovered that she was poised on the brink of a revelation that had the potential to destroy every promise that she had made to Eric. Eric's indiscretion with Taylor, the child he had fathered in secret, caused Donna's carefully crafted world to shatter as the truth began to reveal itself in the quiet corridor. Outside of the intensive care unit, she walked around in a white silk robe that she had hurriedly put on. It was a terrible reminder of the closeness she had enjoyed with the guy she loved, and the cloth was soft and comfortable. Every step was filled with recollections of confessions that were whispered in chambers illuminated by the moonlight, promises that were exchanged during a happy wedding, photographs taken during the day, and laughter that had always appeared to be meant to endure the darkest nights. When Donna was finally confronted with the truth about Eric's betrayal, she felt the icy fingers of doubt wrapping themselves around her emotions. As Ridge emerged from Steffy's room, she noticed that her vision had become hazy. Eyes that are bruised and bloodshot convey a sense of unrelenting anguish and sleeplessness. The two of them looked at one another across the antiseptic hallway at that very time. A reflection of love that has been betrayed and the agony of secrets that will not be buried altogether. While she was standing behind Ridge, Taylor fell on her knees, her hands joined together as if she were praying, and tears were running down her cheeks, which were soiled with makeup. The woman on the floor, whose secret had nearly killed her child and now threatened to murder her own soul, was the source of Donna's growing sorrow. Donna's anguish was not only for her own broken marriage, but also for the woman on the floor. As Eric stood helpless at the entrance of his daughter's room, he experienced the full force of the betrayal he had intentionally committed. The casual affair that he had believed to be buried, the whispered lies that had sheltered him at the expense of his daughter's identity, and the trust that he had broken in the woman that he had sworn to love have all been revelations. He had the want to reach out to Donna and express words of contrition that he was not even sure he believed. But the distance that separated them seemed to be such that it could not be overcome. Steffy's survival stood in stark contrast to the destruction of relationships that was left behind as a result of the truth. In the silence that followed, the faint click of doors and the distant buzz of life-saving machinery were all that could be heard. A terrible consolation that reverberated through the corridors of the hospital like an unstable heartbeat was the fact that Steffy was still alive. from the perspective of everyone else. The path that lay ahead was a jumbled collection of regrets and questions that remained unanswered. Would Ridge be able to forgive Taylor for the secret that had caused their most precious bond to be completely severed? If Steffy knew that he had loved her under a false pretense, would she ever look at him in the same way again? Would it be possible for Donna to find the courage to confront Eric once more, devoid of the recollection of his treachery that would contaminate every embrace? In addition, what kind of future could Taylor possibly see beneath the cloak of her own shame, knowing that the lie that she had buried for such a long time threatened to define her? What is her legacy? Ridge crouched down next to Steffy's bed as the night grew darker and the city lights flashed through the blinds. He placed his hand on hers and made a silent promise that they would never be related, regardless of whether or not they were related by blood. He would battle for her love and forgiveness if she would come to him. Taylor buried her face in her hands while she was still on her knees. She was plagued by the thought that every moment of enjoyment she had ever experienced was contaminated by the secret that she had held, and that she would spend the rest of her days being haunted by the wreckage of the choice that she had made. Brooke was standing behind them both, resolute in her intention to serve as the anchor that prevented anyone from falling into complete and utter despair. And Donna, who was shrouded in her robe, finally lowered her shoulders, which were shaking, and steeled herself in preparation for the confrontation that she knew was going to take place, even if her tears were falling uncontrollably. The truth had spoken its final, most crushing word in the silence of that hospital wing, in the midst of the beeps and the soft breathing of the most difficult family in the world. Now that Steffy is still alive but has been irrevocably altered, they must all learn how to rebuild on a foundation that has been shattered by betrayal and is held together by a love that will be put to the test in ways that have never been seen before. Feel free to share any video requests in the comments. I'll try to make a video about it. Stay connected with the Glammed Rebel for all the latest updates, spoilers, and deep dive recaps. See you in the next video. Stay safe and healthy. May God keep you safe. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell button for daily updates.